Good evening and welcome to the December 8th Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a continuation of the deliberations of the Clear and Objective Housing Code amendments. And this meeting is a continuation of our Planning Commission meeting from November 23rd. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of. Thank you for your patience while I work through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone again for your patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. Okay, with that, I'm moving on to agenda item A, public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. The Planning Commission reserves 10 minutes at the beginning of our meeting for public comment. Do we have anyone for public comment? As a reminder, your hand must be raised in the queue for public comment.
We do not have any hands raised.
You do not have any raised hands. Okay, I will then close this portion. The public comment is closed. And we will move on to item B, deliberations. And with this, I would just like to mention that we're scheduled for 3 hours this evening, and somewhere around 7 o'clock, if I'm doing my math right, we will take a 10-minute break, which, believe me, I will be the most interested in of any of us probably. So I'll be minding the time, and at 7 o'clock or somewhere around there, I'll take us on a break for 10 minutes. So with that, Janessa, please take us on our journey.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everybody, to Deliberations. I'm Janessa Dragovich. For anybody watching from home, I'm the project manager for the Clear and Objective project. And we started these deliberations on the 23rd, and we got through these first 9. We got through about 9 items. And we're going to continue tonight and hopefully with our long meeting, maybe be able to get through the remainder of the issues. And so we're just going through kind of the testimony comments that came in. The agenda packet for the 23rd had the summaries of the testimony comments that were received in addition to staff responses. There were a couple remaining items that I was working on getting some answers for. I have answers and clarifications on those, so I'll walk through those tonight too. And then once we get to the end, we'll see if there's any remaining questions or comments from any commissioners, and then get to the final formal recommendation at the very end once we've gotten through any deliberations and discussion items that we need to. So I'm going to share my screen to get us started. Do let me know if sharing the screen becomes more distracting and you'd rather have the face-to-face discussions. I'm open to hearing to stop sharing for a while so that we can do that, or to jump back. I want to do whatever is most helpful for you all to see, whether that's seeing the code language on the screen or just being able to talk freely about it and see those facial expressions and have a better interaction with the video. So let me know and give me a cue if you would like me to do either share or not share. The first item, let me share the screen for now. And I'll give it a second to pop up. Does everybody see the screen with the index list? Okay. So right here is the highlighted where we stopped last time. So Eugene code 9.6810 is the section that we're on. It's related to block length requirements. And we had some testimony that had come in about wanting to add another clear and objective exception, similar to one that's available to the general track now. It's similar to this one that will become 9.6810 sub 2C. However, because of the clear and objective requirement, that exemption has some discretion within it, or some language in it, I should say, that is problematic for clear and objective. So we would copy that and change it a little bit to make it work for clear and objective. We talked a little bit about incorporating a cap for the block length if the exception applies. And I worked with Public Works staff, and the number that we came back as a recommendation is 700 feet. So the typical block length requirement is that a block length should not exceed 600 feet. But there are some situations, Renee Clough's testimony had brought up, like certain situations where you've got a development site where there's two stubbed streets coming right up to the property lines, that to connect them smoothly may require more than 600 feet. So that's kind of a existing street alignment issue that's fairly clear and objective. By setting the cap of 700 feet, it ensures that we're not just kind of, opening up for some, 1,100 foot blocks or some kind of wild and crazy ones that we really don't want to create problems with our transportation system. So, 700 is the recommended, and this is the staff recommendation would be to go ahead and add that clear and objective exception, similar to that offered to the general track applications at this subsection 2C as it's in the packet, and incorporating a cap of 700 feet.
Okay, I see Kristen Taylor, Commissioner Taylor, yes.
I have two follow-up questions. I recognize that the concern about the ambiguous terms that preclude or may be exempt are in the discretionary track. I'm just curious, why would we put ambiguous terms? Why would we even leave them in the discretionary track? May be exempt. So I kind of want an understanding of why would you use language may be exempt. So don't you want essentially to achieve more clear and objectivity throughout the code? So that's one question. The next question is, can you explain why 700 feet? Because in this language, just for instance, 8 feet was brought up. I just want a better understanding of why 700 feet was the chosen number.
Sure. First off, on the ambiguous terms or preclude and maybe exempt, as you recall, the scope creep has been a huge issue with the clear and objective project, and so we really have just tried to maintain, because there's a lot of squirrels that we could chase down in wanting to perfect existing code that's not necessarily related to the clear and objective project. And so that's the answer to that. I mean, I'd love to go through and identify a lot of different issues that I'd love to kind of suggest some cleanup, but that's really scope creep is the reason why we haven't gone there. There have been this isn't the first time that the code that's outside of the scope of clear and objective has been brought up as a possible change, and we've kind of maintained that that it's out of the parameters of this project. But that's not. I understand your point of the benefit of cleaning up the terms throughout the code. This one just really, it's not a code section that applies to clear and objective projects at all. And so it feels really outside of the scope.
Vanessa, before you go on, let me just clarify this, because actually this isn't a scope creep. This actually is part of the scope. You're directly making a change in the language, at least correct me if I'm wrong. But under subsection 2, for instance, the existing language says, unless an exemption is granted based on one or more of the following. That's actually clearer than what you're proposing. It's saying an exception, if you flip it, an exception is going to be granted if you meet one of the following. So you, by restating the way the way I read this actually created ambiguity in, so it wasn't a direct, you have to make a change, or you've chosen to, may be exempt from block length requirements in section 1. So based on one or more, so I guess I'm not understanding exactly that argument in this case.
So I think I understand what you're saying. The reason that unless an exemption is granted became maybe exempt is because before it was really a straight exemption that was only available to general tracker. It was only subject to those 4 possible scenarios where you could get the exemption. So we had to kind of carve out the ability to provide an exception for clear and objective projects specifically. And so it became not as simple as unless exempt based on boom, 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 and more something where by creating an exception path for clear and objective, we kind of had to have sub 2 and sub 3. Sub 2 is now for just the general, not clear and objective. Sub 3 became the new section creating clear and objective exemptions. So the language that's tweaked up here in subsection 2, it's really only changing the language to create that extra alternative exception for clear and objective, to distinguish the exceptions listed under sub 2, which apply for the general track, and then it takes you to sub 3 for exceptions for clear and objective. But you'll notice like A, B, C, D, we did not change any language within these sections. And that's really the substantive content in this section. Does that make more sense, or? Lauren or Alyssa, does it?
Commissioner Taylor, is it the phrase may be exempt that's causing you heartache?
Yeah, it's just, I was just curious. I can move on. I just think the prior language was actually clearer than maybe. And
yeah.
I would love.
Janessa's right that it doesn't have to be clear and objective because it only applies to the general track standards. However, it probably could be reworded a little bit to be, instead of saying may be exempt, could be something closer to what it used to be, which is, will be exempt if it complies with one or more of the following, or something along those lines.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. I'm sorry to get in. It actually, these small things actually end up sometimes being gigantic challenges within a process. So that's perfect. That's great.
And to answer your question, Commissioner Taylor, on the 700 feet, so that came from Public Works Transportation staff, and kind of when I was vetting the possibility of adding this extra exception for clear and objective, they initially kind of pushed back a little bit because 600 feet really is intended to be the maximum block length. And so I think there was a sense that we might be kind of pushing on something that is already intentionally a maximum. And especially in the context of alternative modes and pedestrian connections and biking, being bicycle friendly and stuff, the longer our block lengths get, the more of a hit those systems kind of take. And so the 700 feet was considered kind of an acceptable increase over the 600 foot that's really ideally the maximum. But to account for these kind of situations that, like I said, when you've got streets that are aligning and are kind of dictating how you're doing your street connectivity, by doing 700, it's not necessarily a grossly extended block length, but it's also over 700 feet. If you're required to put something in there, it's creating two 350 foot block lengths, which are also not really super small, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of the reasoning behind the 700. I feel like 700 to 800 is probably the strongest or the longest that they might be supportive, but 700 was definitely the number that I felt there was more comfort over for providing a straight out exception. And keeping in mind too that there's still the adjustment review option for, you know, if there's other factors. This is specific to the existing street alignment exception.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think what I see here is that we're changing the written text, the draft text from 600 to the recommended 700. Is that right? Is that what we're voting on? A nod?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so if I can get thumbs up on that change, then moving from 600 to 700. I'm going to count.
Can I clarify?
Just for clarity for a second.
Sorry, go ahead, Janessa.
Go ahead, Janessa.
I was just going to say, if we could, it's a little bit more than that, because we're actually recommending adding the exception and having the exception have a cap of 700. So the recommendation for straw poll would be to add a clear and objective exception similar to that offered to the general track at sub 2C. So that gives you the bulk of the language that we'll use, and incorporating a cap of 700 feet, because the existing language says kind of like as close to 600 as possible.
So we're not going to be able to state specifically the words, but the idea is adding something that is like 2C that has 700 feet as its
cap.
Okay, can I see thumbs up on that then? So I'm going to count out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I believe that's all of us.
And Lauren, do we want to put in the,
sorry,
excuse me.
Ken has dropped off on my screen here.
Yeah.
So, I hate it when that happens. So are you a thumbs up, Ken?
I did see a
I
thumbs.
am. Can you hear me?
Okay, so that's a 7-0 then.
All right, yeah, I can't seem to get my video on, so.
No, my screen is not.
I'm here.
Somebody gets cut off and at that moment it was you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not going to work well. All right. Okay, so I think there. Oh, look at that. Now I got everybody. Commissioner Borowski, yes.
And I just wanted to clarify, did Lauren want to change the language of the may to whatever she feels is more clear and objective? Was that part of this thumbs up as well?
That was not, but do we need to vote on that? Yes, I'm getting a nod. Okay, so let's vote on that. So this is changing the language that's at the head of this particular section to be clearer about when the subs come into play. About, oh boy, that was really clear, wasn't it? So now I'm going to ask for a thumbs up on that one.
So can I get a clarification?
Yes.
So it's essentially, it's the may be exempt that's at subsection 2.
Right.
And per Lauren's suggestion.
I'm going to say reword.
Reword the may be exempt phrase.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to count thumbs again. Thank you for your patience. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Commissioner Edwards is either frozen or 7. Okay. So there we go. 7-0. Thank you very much.
Lauren, are we good? Is that okay? Awesome.
Oh, I see what you're doing. I could just read what you're typing over here.
Hey.
Wow.
Let me scroll us up a little bit. So next we'll move on to subsection 9.6815 2H1 on page 16 of the packet. And I will switch here. So you can see this one. And that was a request to change, a requested change to remove and under separate ownership related to the exemptions or exceptions for existing buildings off the development site. And the staff response, hopefully you read, and I'll leave it at seeing if anyone wants to discuss this item or our staff response on it. We recommended keeping the exception as written. And then
Commissioner Taylor, I see you have your hand up. Yes.
Thank you. So here's where my concern lies. Is I'm definitely a proponent of we don't want to unnecessarily remove housing, for instance. So let's say there's a large lot and or a lot and there's an existing building. I recognize that you've pointed out a building such as a shed. It's still a building. A shed isn't really why I'm talking about this. I'm talking about a building, let's say a residence. I would love for this to not just be under separate ownership. I would like this exception for existing buildings on the development side as well. I think it's an item of sustainability. I'd rather maintain existing structures. I think some of, I would really be unfortunate if somebody decided to go through clear and objective, and that was really important to them, and they tore down a building that they would have otherwise kept just to go through clear and objective, which is not necessarily out of question. So so that's important. I would be open to listening to more. I see your concern about a shed because I would like that not to occur. So maybe it's except an accessory use or an accessory building. So I don't know if there's, and maybe Lauren, a way to get at kind of the intent of this, which is really to allow, and I recognize part of the argument is we don't have control over adjacent buildings, but we do have control of what's on the property. I would take the next step is why would we want existing structures to unnecessarily be removed?
Are there more comments or not? I feel like this is a little bit, I feel like it'd be good to have some discussion around this item because it is tricky to make it clear and objective and hone it into the level that you're acknowledging, why I have hesitancy there. I feel like if it had come easily to me, I would have suggested a suggested exception for it, to write it differently. I'm just not sure because the definition of building is so broad in the land use code. I'm not sure how to, kind of succinctly capture that under clear and objective. And it's not, I don't believe, Alyssa, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that that's an exception that's allowed under the discretionary track either. Like for existing buildings on the development site to preclude meeting street connectivity.
I don't have the code in front of me, and I can't remember what it says. So I can look that up while you're continuing.
Commissioner Borowski, your hand is raised.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on a frozen screen right now, but the question that I had, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The question that I had was not so much if we do away with it altogether, but is the separate ownership requirement, if we remove that, would that be problematic, Janessa, as to if there's a building on the development site that precludes building the road for street connectivity, as opposed to just if it's on somebody else's property?
Again, I think part of the original intent in this exception and the reason it's under separate ownership is that it's something out of the developer's control. And so to remove that, it opens up the possibility for kind of loophole buildings to be placed that then become an obstruction. Like, I don't want to create something or put language in that allows the creation of kind of a self-imposed hardship, if that makes sense. And then that then they can get, down the road, get an exception for. So that said, I have not, I was not involved in the drafting of this particular code language. It's not out of my wheelhouse. This is transportation, code regulations. And so I'm not quite as comfortable giving you a professional opinion on whether that makes sense or not. This might be something that if it's generating more, that I would like to circle back with more expert internal staff to see how they feel about the exception. And are there?
Yes, Lauren Summers.
I just like a little bit of clarity because I feel like we might be talking about a few different things at the same time. So it appeared to me that the initial comment that sort of created this question was specific to buildings on a property abutting the development site. So not on the development site themselves. And the request was that buildings on the property abutting the development site, that you get the exception for any building, regardless of whether the developer owns the abutting site or doesn't own the abutting site. And staff's recommendation to that was, well, staff recommends keeping that under separate ownership standard because the developer, if it's under separate ownership, the developer doesn't have control over those buildings. If it's under the same ownership, the developer does and theoretically could demolish them to make way for street connectivity. What I hear Commissioner Taylor saying is she's really interested in the type of building that we're talking about, and she wants the ability to maintain buildings and get exceptions for street connectivity for buildings both on the development site and on abutting sites, regardless of the ownership. Did I get that right, Commissioner Taylor? Okay, so I just want us to be clear what we're talking about because it's more than what Janessa had initially teed up for you.
So if I can probably not add any clarity at all to this. So that is helpful because at first I thought we were talking about adjacent properties only and connectivity through adjacent properties. And that was why this was important. And then when we started talking about the subject property, that seemed different to me. So is there any way you can describe a short scenario? This is all about street connectivity. There's an existing building that is somehow preventing streets from connecting. Is that right? And we require connectivity. And so we're going to say you do not have to connect if an existing building is in the way. Is that more or less what we're talking about?
Correct. So that you're kind of weighing at what point do you either modify and accept an alternative, less desirable street connectivity solution versus saving an existing building. So there is a little bit of a balance to that. One other thing is that in looking at this, the under separate ownership language really is probably redundant because the development site by definition is all about, contiguous land under the same ownership. So I think that removing that language, the under separate ownership, is not as problematic as I think the bigger issue is more of the buildings being, how do you create an exception with clarity to know that you are not letting a shed basically trump street connectivity.
Right. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. And for me, couple of points to bring brought up. One, I think we kind of cleared up that the under separate ownership may not be that big of a hurdle to jump over at this point. And on the other hand, you know, sometimes a developer may have 5 lots, but decide to, you know, use 3 of those lots for a development or whatever, and the other 2 are still there under his ownership, but in a different development type of thing. And there may be houses on those lots that would be good to keep, like Commissioner Taylor said. And then the other thing is, you know, Janessa talked about, well, we don't want to create a back door for somebody to be able to do this by having a shed and this and that. And to me, that is casting developers into, oh, they're going to do whatever they can to weasel around these code terms. And in some cases that may be true, but I feel that the vast majority of developers in this community are trying to develop a good, sustainable community. So I don't know. I just, that made me feel a little bit oogie.
Well, let me say that was not my intent to imply that the developers are looking for loopholes or anything like that. But there is a point where we say the reason we have the requirement for clear and objective track, and then we have the discretionary track. We are trying to facilitate a good relationship between our community and the developers that are developing the community, and you know, these are concerns that are community concerns. So just trying to ensure that we're being responsible stewards.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor, I see your hands up.
So I'm gonna give kind of an extreme example, and I haven't really thought about this that far. So I would just like us to consider being thoughtful, because if we're making a decision because we can't define building better, to remove accessory type buildings like sheds from a building, I think we're not doing our job very well. Just in terms of, it seems like I would like to do more, especially because I want to encourage housing. So let's take an extreme example like downtown. Let's say there's a Capstone's a good one. Let's say there was a giant, beautiful existing structure, maybe even historic, not actually on record historic, that would have good protection. But let's say it's a nice building on a multiple block owned parcel, and they have this building, and that building would prevent them from going through clear and objective standards because connectivity can't be made. They'd have to go through discretionary so they could keep that existing building. So I think for us to be regulating for the shed without actually regulating for substantial buildings that could realistically be sitting there, that I don't think we really want to encourage being torn down in lieu of connectivity. So I think there's a more reasonable discussion that typically happens. So I don't know, I hear what you're saying, Janessa. It's a very complicated situation that you're not necessarily the person to kind of address this. But I do think this is worth considering a bit more.
I think I might be able to summarize this. We're actually being asked to make the choice between connectivity or the retention of existing structures. Right now, the language is around, we're going to preserve connectivity at the expense of existing structures. I think what Commissioner Taylor is saying, is it possible we can flip that equation, give them a discretionary track if they can't, you know, to make the connectivity some other way, but for now, keep the structures. I think that's what we're talking about. If it's as simple as that, and there is another path, and in our case, we're saying we're going to favor existing structures over connectivity, I think that might be a reasonable solution here. But I need to hear from Janessa or Alyssa to see if that even makes sense. Commissioner Borowski, your hand is up, but I know it's been up for a while, so it's not up. Okay. So have I oversimplified this?
Yeah.
Alyssa, do you have anything to wait? Oh, sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to say, Commissioner Taylor, we can define building more narrowly than the broad definition of building. That, I mean, that is something that we can do. The question, I think, is where I feel like I'm still waiting to hear from the Planning Commission generally, if that's something that they're interested in doing. And then also, and I'll leave this to Janessa and Alyssa, but it may be worthwhile to bring somebody with more knowledge about the reasoning and necessity for street connectivity than anyone currently on this call, in to talk to you about, why it is drafted the way it is, and why, if there's a case to be made for street connectivity at the expense of existing buildings, even if those buildings are housing. I don't know if there is a case to be made. I'm not in a position to make that for you, but we might be able to bring someone in from Public Works who can.
Okay, I sense that we have ground ourselves here, and I think that's right, Lauren. That if we don't really have the expertise we need right in front of us, which is leaving us at almost nowhere to go at this point. Commissioner Edwards, yes.
I guess the question I would have is, are we trying to qualify somehow specific types of structures? Like, are we trying to, and if that's the case, like, are there any other provisions that exist that would, protect them? Or, you know what I'm saying? Is like, if it is on the historical registry, then I would obviously think that, there could be provision. I don't know. I guess my question is, are we attempting to provide some sideboards that then further define what types of structures? Because I guess I'm just not, without a better solution, I don't really have a lot to add, because I just don't know how to fix it, I guess is my, I agree with Kristen. I guess I completely see her point, but I don't know how we would fix it. And especially in clear and objective. So I guess and I know it's not really helpful, but that's what I have to add.
Well, thank you for that wonderful summary, Commissioner Edwards. I think you're actually, it's kind of summed up where a lot of us are. So Commissioner Taylor.
So I do think Lauren's comment is well taken, is that maybe the first start is first evaluating if the Planning Commission has a straw poll of wanting to look at the potential of an exception being allowed for existing buildings. And that is what I'm suggesting, is what Lauren said, is getting a clear definition of what kind of existing buildings would allow the exception to occur. Because I personally do not think a shed should. I think that, I would rather prioritize connectivity over a shed. Yet if there's a wonderful, residential building house that's developed and connectivity standards are going to prevent the ability for a clear and objective path for a larger development because of that existing house, that would be sad to me. So I think that's probably the first question to ask, and then the parameters of existing building could be evaluated. Yeah.
I've put up on the screen now the existing exception as it stands now in code that we were trying to create for the clear and objective option. So it reads, buildings or other existing development on adjacent lands, including previously subdivided but vacant lots or parcels, physically preclude a connection now or in the future, considering the potential for redevelopment. So that's what we were going with to try to create a very clear and objective, simple exception to recognize buildings as an obstacle.
Chris, can you see my hand?
No.
All right, well, I'm just going to jump in then. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Lisa. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm good. It's part of the problem with screen sharing. So I just want to say, I don't want to, for a shed, stop connectivity. So I want us to have a better definition of what kind of buildings we're talking about. And if that means we're not ready to make a decision on this one tonight, or maybe we are, right? Maybe we are not comfortable with the current language. And so then this one needs to come back to us. But I personally feel like I want more clarity on a building because I don't want to disrupt connectivity for a shed.
Okay, Commissioner Beeson.
I agree with Commissioner Fragola. I agree with Commissioner Taylor. I think we do want an exception in here for existing buildings. I don't think we want to stop connectivity. I support that. We don't want to stop connectivity for a quote shed. So I think we do need more definition. And I think in an effort to kind of move beyond this, maybe we could just provide some direction back to staff on how we get that, and maybe when we get that and how we kind of resolve it.
Lauren, do you think that there's a possible straw poll that we could get to that would give us the latitude to refine the definition of building to, basically check back with Public Works staff on what that threshold is where the exception is merited over getting street connectivity?
I think it really depends on what the commission wants. If the commission would like to see the language that staff comes up with before you make your final recommendation to the city council, then the direction should be to bring it back to you at a subsequent meeting. We're not going to be able to do it tonight. If you are comfortable that staff, like some of the other straw polls that we've already gone through, that you've given staff enough direction to make a change and you haven't seen the exact language yet, but you're comfortable enough that you've given us enough direction that it's going to be fine, then we could do a straw poll along those lines. I kind of feel like I'm hearing that at least some commissioners would like to see it again. And if that's the case, then I don't think you need, well, we could still do a straw poll, but the direction would be, go away, talk to Public Works and bring it back, but that means another meeting.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we've kind of come to the conclusion that a shed ain't gonna work. But for me, I would also like to hear from Public Works on the importance of street connectivity and what, because basically that's what we're doing. We're weighing existing buildings against street connectivity. And we've kind of, Commissioner Taylor has given us a good example of what existing building could be, but yet we haven't really had a full explanation as to why the street connectivity is an important part of our planning process, an important part of our code. So for me, if we're going to define what buildings we think are worth giving up street connectivity, I want to have a more robust discussion about the importance of street connectivity so that I can weigh that, okay, yes, a single family house is worth it to give up conductivity, but a garage may not be, and so I think that may entitle another meeting.
Commissioner Taylor.
So there's a couple of things that I think might be helpful to people, to Commissioner Fragola, for instance. So the way it's currently written, one is we don't have control of adjacent property that's owned by another entity. So it doesn't matter. If they have a shed, it doesn't matter. We can't, an owner can't control that. So connectivity can't happen if you're adjacent to a property that client doesn't own or that owner doesn't own, if that makes sense. So they, just like Lauren was saying, there's two issues. So I have no issue with the way it's written for that separate site, because it could be a shed, it could be any building. I'm just bringing up, why aren't we valuing existing buildings, substantial existing buildings on the development site and allowing an exception? So that's really my question. So I think if we're gonna, there's two parts to that code. So personally, I'm very comfortable if the Planning Commission as a whole is agreeable or agrees through straw poll, is I'm fine with staff making that change, understanding that I have the same concern Janessa does. And I understand her explanation is brilliant. I don't want a shed protected on the development site. I'm just talking about an existing substantial structure. The other thing to bring up is that I am also personally open to an adjustment review as an option, which staff also recommends. I just think that connectivity is important. While it's important, there are times, there are large buildings that prevent connectivity. Now remember, depending on how large it is, you still are going to have to meet street standards. If it's a giant lot that that it's just one street, it's not all streets. It's not saying if you have an existing building, all required streets for the entire development, you don't have to meet connectivity. No, it's just where it lies in the math of requirements of connectivity and how that street layout is supposed to occur. If an existing building is there, you skip that one. So I'm comfortable with staff. That was a lot, sorry.
So Commissioner Taylor, just to clarify, if I think you're comfortable with staff, finish that sentence, with staff what?
I am comfortable if we have to first, the critical thing that I think straw poll needs to be taken is, does Planning Commission want to extend the exception to existing buildings on the development site? That's the question. Right. Then the next question is, what types of buildings? The adjacent site, like I said, I'm in agreement with staff. We don't have control over it. It doesn't matter what building stands in the way, even if it's a shed. We don't have control.
So in other words, we could straw poll the language as it was proposed this evening. And then we can straw poll whether we want to add the additional language for the on-site existing structures and a definition of that, and then a weighing of connectivity on-site issues. Is that correct? Two different votes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I think what I want to do then is to straw poll where we started, which was the staff recommendation for the off-site. And if I can have thumbs about that, that would be good. I'm counting.
Let me real quick make sure that I'm abundantly clear on what we're straw polling here. So the first one is to include.
We're approving the language as written on the first one.
As written.
Just as written. Okay.
Right.
And no, so the first one is not any changes yet recommended. Okay.
That's correct. So thumbs on that. Thank you, Commissioner Fragola.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Commissioner Borowski? 7. Okay, so that's a 7-0 language as written. So now we would like to have staff come back to us with language about on-site provisions, which include the definition of what those buildings might be and the value that we need to understand about connectivity itself, so we can weigh off preserving existing buildings versus connectivity. So let's get a straw poll on that. Thumbs up.
Can I get a clarification?
Yes.
Commissioner Ramey, if I can make a suggestion, that really the straw poll is, to start, is Planning Commission interested in extending an exception to the development site? Then we'll follow through with the other. Because if we shouldn't be talking about buildings, sure. People don't want to support it.
Right. Yes. So yes, support for including existing structures on the development site. Thumbs up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's a 7-0. And then do we need another vote, or does that by definition say that staff is coming back to us with language?
I could use some clarity. I heard Commissioner Taylor say, I think, that she didn't necessarily need to see the language again before the recommendation went to City Council, but I feel like I heard Commissioner Borowski say that he would like to see the language again and would like specifically to hear from Public Works. So it would help me to get some clarity on that question.
And I'll just add to that, Commissioner Borowski, I don't know if you had a chance to look. I had thrown up the purpose and intent statement for street connectivity from the code here. I don't know if you had a chance to kind of take a look at that, and if that satisfies your what's the purpose of this section, or if you still would like to have a representative talk to the commission more.
You know, I don't want to hold up the process. If if the rest of the commission feels like staff can come up with a recommendation of buildings that they feel are appropriate, but that's kind of a leap of faith. You know, is Janessa's opinion of what a building that's appropriate to save good enough for the commission at this point, or is it us as citizen members of the community giving voice to the code, being the people who decide which buildings are worthy of saving and which ones are able to be torn down for connectivity? For me, that can happen pretty easily at another meeting. You know, if you come back to it and everything looks good, it could be a 5-minute yes on that at the top of another meeting type of a deal. But if it's more than that, it may take a more robust discussion.
So I'm going to do a straw poll now on whether we want staff to return this item to us for further consideration. So thumbs up, say we're going to bring this item back to us at a future meeting. It's going to include definition of structures. It's going to include some background information about connectivity. So thumbs up on that idea. I've got 1, 2, 3, and thumbs down on that idea. 1, 2, 3. Who did I miss? Oh, Commissioner Fragola. Yes. Your thumb, how would you vote on this issue?
I have a question. So is there, in this situation, is there an ability to go to an adjustment review?
Not right now.
Not right now. Okay.
An adjustment option would be the chance to use more discretionary language. I'm kind of on the fence myself. I feel like if we can refine the definition of building enough and in a clear and objective way, then that I feel like that's feasible possibly, but I haven't tried to draft that language. This one's I apologize for not being.
All right, so Janice, I have my decision. So considering it's taking us an hour to get through 2 out of 14, I have a feeling we're going to be coming back anyway. So I guess I'm saying I agree with Commissioner Borowski. I want to see what is going to be the final definition of the buildings. I feel like as a commissioner, I have the responsibility to review that. So I'm falling into that group.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Fragola. So
Yeah.
that I believe carries the day towards returning this back to the commission with additional language for us to consider.
Can we recap, just because I know that this video wasn't on, who were the 3 that voted thumbs down on this straw poll? Edwards, Taylor, and Beeson. Okay. So we will return with some refined, some suggested language to add the exception for buildings on the development site and refine that language for building. And then, and I'll arrange to have somebody who can speak to street connectivity and give you better information and answer questions. Okay. With that, then we'll move on. This next one is under the same subsection, H for the street connectivity. Oops. This time it's a suggestion to reduce 25% to 10%. I explained in the staff response that doing a quick kind of back of the envelope calculation from a typical kind of subdivision, the street took up about 18% of the development site. And so the request to drop it to 10% felt a little bit too much for me, because you would be able to make that justification, I think, quite a bit to get the exception. But I'll leave it at that and see if there's any discussion.
Commissioner Taylor.
Well, I am more, once again, you guys, I mean, you've all heard this, is that really we're balancing obviously the need for housing and getting and achieving the goals of clear and objective, straightforward, and a path to get us more housing. So if staff worked on this with rough calculations and got approximately 18% for an access lane, what I guess I'd ask Janessa is, I'm thinking, why not do it 18 or 20%?
And that's your prerogative to propose a modification of that. This was, you know, kind of my weighing in based on the suggestion that I received in testimony and giving you kind of my response. But I think that that's a fair, you know, suggested recommendation.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, I did this when I was reading it too, is that I would reverse it, because the provision of an intersection street will require dedication of 25% or more. I guess I would dip, rather than the 18 to 20, I would say 15 or 18. So I guess I would propose 15%.
Commissioner Fragola.
I think you're muted still, Commissioner.
Thank you. I was going to say I support the reduction to the 20%. I thought that 10% seemed too low based on the calculations that were done by staff. And I guess I also think that 15 would be too low, since it's less than the calculations made by staff. But I would be supportive of the 20 that Commissioner Taylor mentioned previously.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Well, for me, the testimony came in and said to 10%. Janessa did a back of the envelope for one specific type of development, you know, a 9-lot thing with, you know, bigger development is going to have a lower number. A smaller development is going to have a higher number percentage wise. So we've got one back of the envelope thing to look at. We've got testimony from professionals that do this on a regular basis. So for me, as much as I hate writing code on the fly like this, because I hate it when other elected officials do it, but I agree with Commissioner Taylor, and I think that a 15% would be something that I could land on and feel comfortable with.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
So I just want to provide a clarification. So sorry I started the way I did, because like I said, I reversed it. Is that if you read the code section, provision of an intersecting street will require dedication of X% or more of the total development site area. That is the clear and objective. Remember, there are a bunch of other code standards that are going to actually inform what those streets are going to be required to, what the street standards are going to be for the proposed development. So this is just the bottom, this is just the clear and objective minimum requirement. So if they can get to 18, we don't want to have it slightly higher, because then you've got 2% of wasted. I'm just going to use this, this hypothetical. I agree with Commissioner Borofsky. I really am uncomfortable doing this on the fly. So if they've got 18% and we say 20, you have 2% of wasted area on public right of way. I mean, so I would say what we're trying to achieve, if they've got 18, and staff, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm interpreting this wrong, I would say 15%. I would actually personally go to 10%, but I'm honoring the process and the various pieces of input. So that's where I go to 15 or 18.
Okay.
If I might, this might be one to kind of, since we've already established from the last one that we need a transportation expert to walk us through connectivity and the importance of it. I'm having a little bit of my spidey senses kind of going off here, feeling like I'm out of my wheelhouse. And to me, these are exceptions. And they have to be clear and objective, but clear and objective doesn't have to be the lowest bar for development. Clear and objective standards need to be check boxes. And so, that's why more times than not, they tend to be a little bit more rigid than what you can get through the discretionary track, because we're limited on the discretion that we can apply. So I just have a little concern that if we get this number wrong and go too low, that we could effectively impede our ability to get street connectivity. And that need may be bigger than the need to fine tune this down to the smallest exception, because the smallest exception is then going to be what sets the bar, the new standard. And so that's all I would say, is that it may make sense to bring this one back when we return with the exception for the buildings.
Commissioner Fragola, you had your hand up there, it went away, but I'm going to put you in line here ahead of Commissioner Taylor. That's all right. Go ahead.
All right, I'm muted. Is there an adjustment option on this one? There is one, right?
Yes, there is. Down here. That is another good point, is that these were meant to be very clear exceptions that are codified, and then going to the adjustment for those kind of stickier, nuanced situations.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, I think getting I'm reading it again. Seriously, this one, I spent so much time and thought it's a provision. So basically it's an exception. So I love that just that reminder, it's an exception or an exemption. So you don't have to meet the connectivity for street standards. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it is, I was right the first way I said it. So it needs to be above. So I'm sorry about that I've confused everyone, because I obviously keep flipping it as also. So 20% is where I would land, just slightly lower. And I do agree with you, Janessa. I don't like to do this on the fly. So if we're going to bring Public Works, maybe we accumulate some of these that we have more detailed questions.
So can I suggest, or sorry, was there another hand raised from a commissioner? We could straw poll on this one to have staff reach out to transportation staff and be prepared to return with more information on what the appropriate reduction would be.
I believe in the context of the item we just finished, which means we will have staff returning to us in any case, it seems like a good option, and I will be voting for it. But I would like now to do a straw poll on returning this item to us at a future date with transportation staff to explain it. thumbs up for that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is unanimous. Thank you.
So next section is 9.68205C. And this was one that I didn't have highlighted for necessarily for a straw poll. However, there is a highlighted change suggested by us to remove subsection 2. It was a pretty clear one. It was unintended that we were scooping up an exception or something that wasn't an exception in the discretionary track. So I guess the question can we pass on this one?
We can. Let's show our thumbs. Some of us are doing that. So thumbs up for passing. Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7-0. Yes.
Okay. So the next one is 9.6885 sub 2. We're now getting into trees. So this one again was not one that I had flagged as a straw poll. It was a clarification on the applicability, and I answered that in the staff response. So we can verify that there's no need to address this one and move on if that works. I see some thumbs up.
Let's go ahead with thumbs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7-0.
Great. So the next one is related to a requested change. So we're still in this 9.6885. We will be for a little while. This one was related to the critical root zone definition and the allowable impact to the critical root zone that's embedded in the definition of tree removal. So as you might recall, we did change the critical root zone ratio that formerly was basically a 1.5 feet for every inch of diameter breast height. Now it's a foot for every inch in diameter breast height. So that is going to shrink the regulatory critical root zone. When we did that, we also adjusted the allowed impact to reflect that change. However, with the questions that came up when I was discussing this with stakeholders, I realized that the proportion that we reduced it was actually wrong and wasn't proportional to the reduction in the critical root zone. So the staff recommendation is to change it so that the allowable impact to the critical root zone is 20% instead of 15%. So it's actually proportional to what it would be under the regular standards. And that one we do.
Commissioner Taylor.
You're muted, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you, sorry. Just in response to some of the public comments is, I like that first I would keep 15% of the critical root zone of a tree, comma, or topping, comma, or severing the cambial material on 50% or more of the circumference of the tree trunk. I just want to clarify, those are all ors. So an owner isn't going to be required to actually determine all three of those. They could choose one.
Let me pull up the... Okay, so what you're looking at is here, 15% or topping or correct.
So it's a choice because basically, typically it's critical root zone, topping or severing the cambial material. That rarely happens. So I just want to make sure it's or, so that's fine. Okay.
Okay, I see no one's hands. What we're being asked to do is change the, I hope I'm going to get this right.
Can you read it there?
Oh, yes, I did have it right. Change the 15% to 20%. Can I have a show of thumbs for that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up and 1 down. Commissioner Taylor, have I got you right?
Yep.
Okay, 6-1.
Okay. Then the next one, again, is not one that I flagged as a straw poll. It was a clarification on why the R2 zone isn't exempt. And that was, if you recall, early on when we were looking at the tree standards, well, throughout the clear and objective update, we've really tried to fine tune when the standards are applicable. That's one of the ways that we're kind of removing barriers, is by addressing applicability and being more kind of surgical about when they apply and when the need is there. And so basically R1 and R2, the lower to mid density developments were what we were trying to capture. And we tried to reduce the applicability to multifamily developments. And that was why we accepted out R3, R4, and other zones.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another one where if we can thumbs up that we're okay to pass without a straw poll if nobody wants to discuss it.
Okay, show of thumbs. I think we're going to be unanimous here. Moving on.
Great. Next one is also a simple clarification on how multi-stem trees diameter breast height is measured, and that was, it's within the language or the definition of significant tree that it directs us to use the two largest stems. So that's already addressed in the existing code.
Again, if we're ready to pass on this one, just thumbs up on that one. I think we are unanimous there.
Okay. So the next one is on page 21 in the packet. It's requested change to exclude some trees from needing to be included in the tree preservation and removal plan, and clarification about who can create the site plan. And I'm going to switch back over real quick so we can see that in context here. Trying to get that there.
Janessa, do we, sorry, sorry, can I?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Taylor.
Subsection D, sorry, did we skip that one? You just said it was a clarification.
On the multi-stem trees.
Okay, so even subsection D in the maximum mitigation, just because we got some additional public input from this, just in terms of specifically outside the South Hills area. So
I think that's still coming up, where there is some staff recommended changes to the adjustment review criteria that would allow for more mitigation, and to clarify the mitigation on when the tree area alternative is used. So
okay,
is that what you're referring to, do you think? Or
yeah, I mean, this is where I don't want to hold up the process. I'm not outside the South Hills area. I actually believe in being able to mitigate entirely, just because I want urban infill. I want to observe the UGB and our city limits and provide density outside the South Hills area. So I'm not personally a proponent of, because if you do the math, the minimum preservation, and then it's 50% of 40%. So you have this preservation of 20%, but let's say, the site can be, you're balancing a bunch of code standards, and you've got some trees that maybe just are wrong. They're not in the ideal location. I'd rather see a dense development meeting some of the other standards and replant a tree within our city limits, because I do, once again, really believe in our statewide planning goals. So I guess I'm not a proponent of that one altogether, but I've always been the voice of not a proponent of that. So
can I don't know if that did come up before, and we did create the adjustment review option as where you can get to 100% mitigation outside of the South Hills area. So that is a possible path, Commissioner Taylor. It's just that the 20% is what you get down to without an adjustment. You can get beyond that all the way to 100% with an adjustment.
So I guess, I mean, before we move on, I would like to propose, just because this is the adoption process, that actually outside the South Hill area, that essentially 100% can be mitigated and doesn't have to go through an adjustment review.
Janessa, is this coming up later, or is this the only time we have to talk about this?
If we're talking about changing the outright maximum mitigation, this number right here, then I would like that to be a specific straw poll, because what I was talking about is more related to the adjustment review criteria and what's allowable through that.
Okay, so to keep us clear in our process, and Commissioner Taylor, I think this falls into the category of something we'll bring up after we get through this laundry list. So you'll all have the choice to bring things up, and it sounds like you would like to bring this one up later. We'll footnote that and we'll get to it. But in order to kind of keep us going down, let's just keep going.
The only caveat is that we should not, I would recommend we don't look at the adjustment review criteria until we address this. Otherwise, it's, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the one that we were on was this requested adding with the exception of all trees that are located more than 30 feet outside the nearest proposed lot line. And the clarification about whether an engineer or surveyor could create the site plan, since arborists often are not creating site plans. And that clarification was provided within the staff response, that there's nothing that prohibits an arborist or landscape architect from collaborating on the site plan.
Commissioner Borowski, I saw your hand was up and now it's not. Are you?
I was going to speak to what Commissioner Taylor was talking about earlier, so I just am a little confused on that. So,
thank you. We'll be back. Commissioner Taylor.
So I actually I do have a concern. I recognize, I appreciate staff's response. I actually think that the way it's worded actually doesn't really, from a clear and objective standpoint, doesn't really allow that collaboration to occur. So if you read section 1, a tree preservation removal plan is required except as provided in the section. The plan must be prepared by a certified arborist or licensed landscape architect and shall provide the following. So if it says the plan shall be prepared, that's clear and objective. And honestly, arborists don't typically they do not prepare the plans. They provide reports based on surveyor or engineering plans. So the way it's worded actually doesn't allow for what you've described as collaboration, because it's clear and objective. And if I was going to move through this, this would present a problem. I wouldn't be able to hire an arborist. Potentially. I mean, there are arborists, some of them that are actually embedded in landscape architecture firms or have the ability to create or desire to create plans. But there will be a subsection of arborists in town that will not be able to be hired. And this is clear and objective. So I just would I would change the language to just allow for plans to actually be prepared by those other two professionals, as long as obviously a landscape architect or an arborist is doing the evaluation. I mean, it's a simple shift.
I'm wondering too, if, as I'm thinking through, there's subsection C down here that requires the statement by the preparer. And Lauren, I'm kind of interested in your take on this too, whether we could adjust this so that we still have the statement or something from the arborist that the tree preservation and removal plan meets the tree preservation requirements. And then basically soften the language up here that implies that creates that potential confusion about the arborist needing to literally draw up the site plan.
Yes, I think we could do it that way, or almost kind of vice versa. I see a couple of different ways to do it. I think what I would be looking for is confirmation from the commission as a whole that you're interested in kind of opening up the the number of fields that are authorized to prepare the plan, and then, you know, who do you want to be involved in the preparation? So it sounds like a landscape architect or an arborist needs to be involved and have done the analysis in some way, but the actual plan set could be prepared by a number of people. Maybe we don't even care who prepares the actual plan set. So I just want to get a little bit of clarity about that.
Commissioner Edwards.
Not being a professional like Commissioner Taylor, I would defer to, I really do appreciate her expertise when it comes to this. And I have heard this criticism by other professionals. To me, it doesn't make sense that we would be overly restrictive if we can accomplish the goals, because we're requiring that, you know, the arborist basically, I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll and I just realized I can't.
Want me to scroll?
No, I was trying to read it. I'm like, why isn't it moving? Because a statement by the preparer is required. So to me, it just seems like an unnecessary requirement, and it seems like a barrier to me. And I would support Commissioner Taylor's recommendation to just remove the requirement that it would need to be prepared by a certified arborist or licensed landscape architect. Those are my thoughts.
I will say that makes it a very, striking that and then adding to the subsection C down here, that's where the arborist weighs in. I think that makes a lot of sense. Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, you see where my concern is. I can, just like Lauren, I see many ways to get there. I think, you know, I don't really, there are these various licensed professionals that can prepare plans, that are qualified and can prepare plans. The individuals who would actually be evaluating it for the topic area are more appropriately the arborist and a licensed landscape architect. I think that's appropriate. So I'm open to however that happens. I just think that it is not, I feel uncomfortable with the way it's currently written. The other thing is I just would love a little bit of a clarification. I think I understand that a statement by the preparer that the tree preservation and removal plan meets the standard tree preservation requirements. I guess I'm wondering why we're doing that. Because with all of these land use applications, there's a written statement, and the written statement is prepared by a professional also. And, you know, in reality, written statements, the entire team is collaborating, the design team is collaborating to get, so for instance, if the preparer is a planner and you've got a team that's got an architect, a landscape architect, civil engineer, stormwater standards, there's going to be collaboration in the written statement to demonstrate findings that it actually meets the code criteria from the civil engineer. So the same is going to be true for tree preservation. So it seems really redundant. And in fact, I mean, PUDs, which, you know, that's a subsection of something that I think is redundant. Each of these professionals, when they submit their plans, they have a stamped and signed drawing. They have ethics, and they have stamped it and said, I'm standing behind this as a licensed professional. So PUDs, for instance, on the cover sheet, each professional has to sign by their name, which once again is redundant. I would love to see that thrown out someday, but basically I view this statement as something similar. It's just it's redundant. So I guess I just need a better understanding of why this is viewed as so important, considering that these are land use applications and there already is a burden of proof that's required to demonstrate compliance. Otherwise, it's not approved. If it's prepared, so maybe getting back to number one, if they're prepared by a certified, the plan is prepared by a certified arborist or a landscape architect or surveyor engineer reviewed by an arborist or landscape architect, maybe that's where I still, in the written statement, it's still going to be evaluated and it's still going to be proven. But if you've got a licensed professional stamping a plan, I don't understand. Anyways, you see, I don't need to go on. I just think I just don't get it.
So the typical review, you get the written statement and the applicant makes a run at showing that they've met the criteria. Staff reviews that and also makes findings. And so there is a little bit of that judgment that goes on under a discretionary land use application. Clear and objective, we can't, like, we're not going to scrutinize how, whether or not the actual plan is meeting the criteria, because they're straightforward check boxes. We're making it very clear what the plan needs to have, and that basically the design professional has verified, and that everything that is in 6.9.6885 that applies has been addressed and is met in that. So the request for the statement or the certification is similar to, like, with geotechnical reports, where we're basically under the clear and objective track trying to place the how do I say it? The sorry, I'm blanking on my words. Lauren, help me out.
The burden of proof.
The burden of proof, but I mean, it's because we can't really dive in and push back and use our discretion if we think that something's not being met. And so that having that statement to just ensure that, yes, they've looked at everything in the code, and that all of the tree preservation requirements have been met. It takes that burden off of staff to be the judge of whether or not that bar has been met. And I understand the statements, and I addressed this in the response. In a perfect world, I totally agree that everything gets caught. However, my real life experience is that we occasionally catch things that get missed, or that were not apply or not thought that they were applicable, but they are. And so I think that having that statement does give a little bit extra assurance that the standards have been considered and applied to the development proposal.
So I think what staff is suggesting is that these judgments that are a part of this application are being made by one of two kinds of professionals, either a landscape architect or a certified arborist. So the fine art of what we're doing then, presuming we agree with that, number one, but presuming we do agree with that, the fine art of what we're doing is how do we have the applicant demonstrate that that is what happened? And so the two choices before us were to have them prepare the plans, which might be tricky, or to have them certify that the plans were prepared in accordance with the regulations that are found in the code. So I think those are in front of us. Those are the two options. And it requires us to agree on two different things. One, that we think certified arborists or landscape architects should certify that these things are happening. And two, that we're going to find a method by which we can know that they were involved with the preparation of those plans. So if we can get there, presuming we're okay with A, then how do we get to B? And one way to get to B is to include this subsection C, sub C down here, the statement by a certified arborist or a licensed landscape architect that the tree preservation removal plan meets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That does that, and that is clear and objective.
Lauren, are you seeing a suggested straw poll that would kind of wrap in the ability to change that language and clarify the plan and who's creating it, while also ensuring that under clear and objective that the plan actually does adhere to the standards?
I mean, I think what Commissioner Ramey just articulated makes sense to me, and does in some ways address Commissioner Taylor's concern with redundancy, because if the language is amended such that we don't really have regulations about who prepares the plans, but we do still say we want licensed landscape architect or an arborist to be involved in the preparation of the plans and to certify that the plans that were prepared, whomever they were prepared by, meet the criteria for tree preservation, then I think, if in the case that a landscape architect does prepare the plans and then also has to certify, that certification is a little bit redundant. But in all other cases, if someone else is preparing the plans, then the licensed professional that we, has the subject matter expertise is the one certifying. I think that certification requirement makes sense.
Commissioner Taylor.
I agree. And it's not just a licensed architect. I think there are certified arborists that can create plans. So those would be the two professionals if they created the plans. I think the statement in subsection C is redundant, but otherwise Lauren and Commissioner Ramey, I totally agree.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. And I think I can buy into this, but again, this makes me go back to one of the reasons why we're here in the first place. And council directed us to go through and look at clear and objective, at least in my opinion, to help remove barriers that may have been there to getting housing built. And barriers may be getting extra people to sign off on things. Barriers can be costs. So every time that we add something that is redundant, it's like, oh yeah, well, we can get that. It may be redundant, but redundancy adds costs. And a lot of time redundancy can add time. Time is also costs. So I think my reading on why we were sent down this thing was to clear and objective, because it had some problems with it, but council wanted it cleared up because they wanted a path to making housing done more affordably. And so that's part of what I'm looking at in these two. So any chance that we have to get away with redundancies that are just there to be redundant, I would like to see us get away from, if that's at all possible.
Commissioner Isaacson.
I'm with Commissioner Borowski. I think that anything we can do to simplify the process as much as we can. I think one of the common complaints I hear is that building in Eugene is costly, it's time consuming, and it's easy to go other places. And obviously, we're responsible to a certain degree for having that conversation. So if this can expedite that process along, I think it behooves us to try.
Okay, so I think where we are, but I'm not sure about this, is removing the sentence about who prepares the plans and adding to sub C a statement by certified arborist or licensed landscape architect that the plans have been prepared. As far as I can tell, that is not redundant yet, but it also allows an engineer to prepare a plan and hire an arborist and have them certify it, which actually is simpler than what we have written here, but I could be wrong. Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, it actually maintains the redundancy for arborists and licensed landscape architects. So the only caveat, the only change I would make, I like it. I think that's good. But the only time I think a statement by the preparer would be required if it was not an arborist or landscape architect.
Right.
Landscape architect. So the only time you'd need a statement would be if an engineer or a surveyor, for instance, prepared them. And so you're gonna need some kind of statement from those guys.
So sub C is then changed to say if plans are prepared. Oh boy.
Commissioner Amy, I think Janessa's language captures Commissioner Taylor's concern. I think what we would do is, instead of removing the requirement for various licensed professionals to prepare the plan, we would add surveyors and engineers as plan preparers. And then in that, excuse me, sub C statement section say that a statement by the arborist or landscape architect is required if they did not prepare the plan.
Yes. Whoop. Yes.
Okay. I like all of that. So I see several spontaneous thumbs up and nodding of heads. I'm sure they're not looking at the clock like I am. So we're going to vote now.
I see Commissioner Fraggle's hand up. Commissioner Ramey, I don't know if she had something to say.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Fraggle, yes.
I wanted to say that sounds great.
Thank you. Now back, show of thumbs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A 7-0 on that one. And with that, it is 7:05. Unless I see any objection, I will put us on pause for 10 minutes. We'll be back at 7:15. I will see you all shortly.
So I'm going to skip over the line item 19, which was the request to remove the arborist landscape architect, and I've just wrote see above because that was covered in the conditional if not prepared by them. Then the next one is related to the request to allow plantless substitutions and to allow 5-foot evergreen minimum height for evergreens for the planting requirement. So on this one, I did reach out with urban forestry and some internal tree experts to vet the suggested additions to the approved tree species list that we created. And most of the suggestions that Carol Shermer had provided, there was agreement that those would be good additions. There were 2 exceptions to that. So grand firs and eastern redbuds are known to be problematic in our area. And so, they have, at least for grand fir, there's some climate change kind of resiliency concerns about the impacts that species is having. So their recommendation was to include all of the specific adds that Carol had requested with the exception of the grand fir and eastern redbud. And so that would be staff's suggestion. In terms of the 5-foot evergreen requirement, the existing requirement is to require a 6-foot evergreen for planting. And what I've heard from developers, and this comes up a lot, is that it can be difficult to get an exactly 6-foot tree from the nursery, and so the request was that 5 feet is a lot more easily attainable. So I think that would be an okay modification if commission wishes to make that. It'll disconnect a little bit because there are other sections of the code that refer to the 6-foot minimum. However, it would make it so that for this specific part, the 5-foot would be allowable.
Okay, I see Commissioner Taylor, your hand's up.
Janessa, thank you for doing such a thorough job. Really, I'm just going to stress that, just following up. I appreciate that. And I would support a 5-foot because that's my experience too. 6-foot is surprisingly challenging. So 5 feet is what I would support. And then I like not perpetuating something we already realize in the code that's a problem. I'd rather us model the direction we want to go and have the other code catch up. Yeah. Or the other parts of the code, not other code, but other parts.
Okay, so I'm going to ask us to show a thumbs on what Janessa has just walked us through here. Those are okay, thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Terrific, 7-0.
And let's see, that's for adding and for the 5-foot, or do we want to call that? We're good on both, correct? Okay. And can I do a quick check? Is everyone okay? Would you prefer for me to share the screen at this point like I've been, or do you prefer to keep it where you, am I okay just talking you through what we're dealing with, or is the visual helpful?
Commissioners, what do you think?
If you can just continue to say the code number, I'm fine if I don't have the visual.
Yeah, and I'm following along on a separate screen as well. So seeing the whole commission is helpful for me.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay. So the next one is also still in trees, 9.6885 subsection 2D3B. This is was clarifications on background and the mitigation. And so there were some this was one where I just highlighted some suggested changes in the adjustment review criteria to address some of those comments. So there's not necessarily a straw poll at this point because I addressed the testimony through the changes to the adjustment review criteria.
Okay.
Sorry.
Commissioner Taylor, you look like you maybe wanted to
Sorry,
say
Commissioner Taylor, your hand's up.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to get to my screen. So I'm sorry, I'm actually super visual. So tell me what sections exactly are we talking about the entire section 3, A and B?
This was specific to 3B.
This is specific to 3B. Okay.
And I'm
So, you know, I actually, can you maybe, I don't know if this is helpful for the group, but I think both Carol and Renee asked some pretty topical questions. And that is, you know, an explanation of why are these being required? Because there's some complexity to this. And I actually think, I think I remember why, but I think for the commissioners that haven't been here to have that just responded to quickly, because you're really clear, Janessa, would be helpful. So it's really, it sounds like it's an alternative so you don't have to provide the plan. Yet within it, there's some interesting things that create challenges. Like, how do you determine the area? And what is that boundary? And where's the definition of it? And I read through this, and I mean, I guess I like the idea and concept, but then also mitigation's not allowed when the tree preservation area, I mean, it gets so complex. And really so I think an explanation, a high-level explanation might help in the rest of commission, because I'm just reading it from a potential user perspective. While I like the option, I get into it and I have questions.
I think that's a good point. And the trees, obviously, this has been our most muddled issue. It's been the thing that has taken the most time to draft the code. We had an initial draft that was very complex and very mathematical and very overwhelming. And so that's why when you were looking at the draft code the first time around, before we got moved on to formal adoption, and by you, the commission, when the planning commission looked at it, we didn't get to a straw poll recommendation on trees, period. Like, that was the one issue that we didn't even get to a straw poll because there were so many concerns and whatnot. So we passed that on to council. They directed us to come back to you with a revised, simplified tree preservation section that included an alternative to the tree inventory. So one of the things that came up was how onerous the tree preservation and removal plan and a tree by tree accounting could be for a large site or a heavily wooded site. That's what kind of brought us to this alternative approach, which is the tree preservation area. And the area is definitely even more relying on the landscape architect or the certified arborist to define that area, because it's the design professional at this point who is certifying that the area that they have delineated and called out is enough, that it includes enough trees in terms of the percentage of DBH on the overall development site without needing to do an accounting method and a table and all of that. But they need to be comfortable enough to certify that the appropriate percentage is preserved based on it, and that area includes enough of the critical root zone of the trees to be preserved to effectively preserve that amount of diameter breast height. So it's intentionally small in terms of the code language, because it's not a incredibly prescriptive path, because that gets back into very complex and pages of code to make that clear and objective, versus the intent was to create something that gives some flexibility for large sites or heavily wooded sites. The mitigation not being allowed, it's only not allowed as a straight mitigation allowance and done through the adjustment review option, because it's inherently difficult to judge that. What does that mitigation mean when we're not doing the accounting method, where that's a little easier to determine how much you're mitigating.
Commissioner Borowski, your hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, I see this as a a way to get to these heavily wooded large development sites. You know, we had specific examples brought to us that saw how onerous it could be. I guess the question that I'm curious about is this clear and objective enough, I mean, that it doesn't open it up for appeals? Because like Janessa said, you've got your developer and your plan and your certified landscape architect saying, yes, this is big enough. I didn't go through and count every tree, but trust me, it's big enough. And you get somebody who wants to appeal the development who can say, no, that's not. And you know, I've seen that happen before, especially with trees. Trees are one of the areas that I see in appeals quite often in the last 7 years. Trees and geotech are a couple of the major things that come before us on appeals. And so can you talk a little bit to it about how it is defensible as a developer to say, yes, this does meet the standards?
I think that part of it is that, again, the written certification. So similar to the geotech, that has been an okay strategy through Clear and Objective to require the design professional's written certification for compliance. So in terms of, getting at what if you've got a design professional who certifies something that's woefully, not meeting the code, that almost gets more into the ethical question, I think, that Commissioner Taylor brought up earlier about the stamped, signed, certified, that there's ethical implications to putting your stamp and seal on something. But in terms of the clear and objective code, the certification itself is what meets the clear and objective nature of the code. So we're not, by requiring that certification, we're not double checking the work that a design professional is submitting on it. We're taking them at face value that they have certified this, they put their name and their seal on it, and that they're comfortable making that statement.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, I had the same, Janessa, thank you. That was a great explanation. I have the same concern that Commissioner Borowski has. Well, so I guess I'd love to hear from Lauren. I would love. I agree. I think that's great. I just think, are there areas like, I don't know, to help out the professional? I mean, it's just the more. So we're straddling a line. You're right. Except for that, I do see the potential. So I guess I'd love to hear from a legal standpoint, because I do see the potential of this being an opportunity for an appeal, that essentially just get another professional in there areas is pretty discretionary. The professional gets to decide what the area is. Whereas if we had defined the area has to have these aspects or draw on other code sections. And I didn't go as far to I think the area might be actually found in the code already, because so what are you trying to achieve in areas? So area is one that I think might deserve a little bit of help, but hearing from Lauren would help, because I think that inherently, for instance, as an example, is discretionary.
So I would echo what Janessa has said, that this is very similar to what we've required historically for geotech analysis, and that has been tested. And the clear and objective piece of the criterion is, is it signed and stamped by a licensed professional? That's what we check. It is or it isn't. That's clear and objective. It's on the professional then to certify that, you know, these pieces that we think are important are being done, and if they're, you know, if they're not doing their job correctly, that could affect their licensure, ethical implications, et cetera. So I echo everything that Janessa said. In terms of, you know, can we prevent appeals from happening? No. People can.
I would love it.
And so I think then the kind of the balancing act is creating enough flexibility in the code language to allow developments to develop in the way they want. But also, you know, that will probably mean that the design professionals will need to submit evidence about why they made the choices they made and, you know, why they say okay. And that happens in geotech now. And certainly someone who's opposed to the development could hire a different professional who could say different choices should have been made. But you as Planning Commission and then kind of on up to LUVA have the ability to say, is this reasonable? Could a reasonable decision maker find that there's substantial evidence in the record to, you know, underpin the conclusion that the licensed professional came to? And as long as that's true, then the decision can be approved or affirmed. So it with flexibility comes a need for more evidence, I think. The less flexibility, the less evidence is necessary, but then, you know, developments become constrained. So that's the balancing act.
So let me follow up. When I said I love it, it's really, it means we've actually done our job as planning commissioners, meaning we've kind of struck that balance where we're providing language that meets and balances all the community's needs. So, I mean, obviously we can't prevent appeals. That's the opportunity for public comment and involvement. So thank you for that explanation. It's great. I don't have any other concerns. I mean, I think you've addressed it. Obviously, you've addressed it well. Thanks.
Commissioner Edwards.
I have a question because I'm kind of confused. There are two very large developments near me on the north side of town that are current homes or current sites of hundreds of homes. And I watched it happen. The area right across the street, right across Gillum from me, was literally logged, clear cut. And there are now 42 home sites, and the trees that were not very compatible with dense housing have been removed, and lots of new trees have been replanted. And my question is, what path allowed them to do that? I mean, because I'm just curious how that was accomplished, because both of these developments that I could refer to are in the same boat. They did not preserve even 10% of the trees. So how are they able to do that? Because the point I'm trying to get at is, with a clear and objective path, it doesn't sound like it's really about preserving the trees if we allow it under a different path. We just want to make it more difficult. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the objective is. And so if maybe you guys could explain to me how they were able to do that. What path did they follow in order to be able to do that? Maybe you know.
So first, without knowing the developments, we could look into which subdivisions they were, what track they used. But contextually, this is another good reminder, a couple things that I've thought of that I wanted to bring up. One is that the existing clear and objective tree standard is that a developer just merely needs to show that they gave consideration to saving trees.
That's right.
Very, very, very low bar. The reason you've got so much tree preservation and removal text in front of you is because this is one of the key pieces that was responsive to improving our effectiveness in addressing and harmonizing and balancing that natural resource preservation element to our land use review. Now, that's also why we exempted things like the denser multifamily development is not going to be subject to these tree preservation standards. So you're really looking at, these are going to be applied predominantly to subdivisions or, PUDs in the South Hills, where that comes up. And this will be more preservation than is currently required under the clear and objective track. However, we were trying to right size the requirements. That's partly why it's gotten so kind of weedy to go through, having a couple options where you can either do the accounting or the area alternative. Why, as Lauren mentioned, the more review we have to do to consider whether a proposal is reasonable or meeting a standard that has any ambiguity to it, the more you need to go through a more discretionary process. That's why we've deferred to adjustment review as the way to really tease out giving more mitigation and adjusting that ratio between how much are you preserving versus how much can you mitigate. I feel like a lot of work has gone into this, and this has been through us, and conceptually a lot of it was given the okay before, and then we talked about kind of fine tuning some of the details. I do feel like what we have here is more effective than showing just consideration, but how it stacks up to discretionary, I would argue that the discretionary criteria, that's part of what some of the comments coming up. We actually took the discretionary track tree preservation language or criteria, put it into the adjustment review language, and that was kind of problematic because it raised the bar too high for an adjustment. And so we're gonna get to some proposed staff changes in that adjustment criteria language to soften it a bit from the discretionary track. So I'm not sure exactly which developments you're talking about to know why the trees were cut down.
Well, I think you answered. If they only had to consider it, then that's all they did. I mean, which I think it's fine. I think it makes sense. It's inside the UGB, and they've made really beautiful neighborhoods and planted a lot of trees. So, I mean, like, I feel like I guess my concern is that we're trying to protect something that if we just are making it harder and forcing them through a different path, but at the end of the day, somebody can still go in and take down all the trees and build housing and plant new trees, then sort of why are we trying so hard to make it more difficult? And I guess that's kind of just the rhetorical question I'm asking. And but I think, Janessa, I think you answered my question. I'm sure that they just had to exhibit consideration, because I think you and I have talked about these particular developments, and they qualified under the needed housing. So
the other thing I'll point out too that can be a seeming disconnect is that where you're talking out in North Eugene, it's not subject to the South Hills study. So a lot of these tree preservation requirements are also to help ensure that we're staying consistent with the South Hills study and the requirements for vegetation preservation embedded in that applicable refinement plan.
Yes. Okay.
I've got Commissioner Isaacson next.
So this is just a process question, I guess, and I think it's either to staff or to John, because maybe he can help me kind of conceptualize this. So if we put the stamp on there that we're asking for before this can go forward, on the appeal process, if I was appealing it and saying that study did not do it correctly, they just rubber stamped it, my guy or gal says that the consideration wasn't made or enough the criteria wasn't met, then does it just break down into, when it gets to the appeal process, a battle of experts into whom is believed more in terms of how that worked? That'd be the first question. And then two, a very simple question for staff. Does staff believe at the end of the result, and I think I got a little bit of this from Janessa in the last segment, but I think Tiffany, you're kind of going in this direction as well. Does staff believe at the end of the day, these rules will create, on balance, more trees after development, less trees after development, or the same amount of trees after development?
I'll take the last part first. I do think that comparing the existing clear and objective or, needed housing track to this clear and objective track that we're doing, I do think that we will end up with more trees in general. Now, whether those are trees that are actually preserved that may not be being captured under the existing needed housing consideration clause, or the mitigation. That's something that I'm excited about, the adjustment review option for increasing the mitigation allowance, and the fact that it takes into consideration being able to count existing trees that are maybe not big enough to be considered a significant tree, but that's, it recognizes that that's better than a tree in the ground already, even if it's, 2 inches diameter, is got a lot better chance of surviving than a new plant. So I feel like we've really tried to kind of, create relief valves and allowances that help remove barriers and make things easier to both get more trees, and increase the health and amount of our urban forest, as well as not create too burdensome a requirement for the needed housing track, or for the clear and objective track. So it would be more, and part of that is because, like, the mitigation it sets kind of a per front door, so many trees as an end result, versus doing a straight, like, now a lot of times what we'll see is if a subdivision has trees, then we'll do mitigation ratios of sometimes 2 to 1, and then down the road 10 years later you get somebody trying to develop a lot and needing to plant 20 trees on a, or something. So we were trying to avoid some of the pitfalls that kind of can happen now in both tracks, and then get something that hopefully could be kind of a model going forward.
If I may, just one last follow-up, and I apologize for taking up the time. In the development that Commissioner Edwards was speaking about, it feels like I kind of understand where she's coming from, in the sense that there's the spirit of the way this is written, and then there was the reality of how it was written. It was allowed to just clear cut everything, and yeah, we of course considered it, but we're planting all that we want. Is there a way of having a bare minimum written in the code where it says, 10% of the trees that are there, you can't go below this threshold? So you can cut all you want after you've considered it, but to go below that requires some other process that we can develop that preserves the spirit of what we're trying to get across, without allowing people to just get bulldozers out and start knocking down things.
I think that there's a lot in there that to unpack and to try to explain maybe how the whole suite of preservation standards kind of work together, where you exit here and do an adjustment here to get to get things. Plus it plays with the exception. So again, part of the reason why we took out multifamily and higher density developments is because there's so many on-site landscaping requirements and perimeter parking landscaping requirements. A lot of trees are going to be required to be planted as part of those developments to begin with. This is really it would add more trees either through preservation or through mitigation than we're getting now.
Okay, I've got Commissioner Borowski up.
I just ask a clarifying question quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Which number are we on?
9.6885.
Is it number 21 or number 22?
Oh, on the line item, 21.
We're on 21 for clarifications on background and mitigation.
We're not really on that topic. That's just kind of where we stopped, but Commissioner Taylor still had kind of some comments about the tree preservation standards. So we kind of took a digression.
Okay, am I up?
Thank you.
Yes, you're up.
Okay. Thank you to Janessa and the other commissioners for their comments. One thing that I would also like, what Daniel said, are we getting more trees, less trees, or the same amount of trees? I think that that's an important fact. And one of the reasons that I think staff landed where we are was because there was significant input from City Council about the importance of trees and tree preservations. And, you know, I went to those City Council meetings and watched them, and they're not as versed in these codes as staff is, or as the rest of the commission is. So some of the comments that they were making was, well, just save every tree type of a deal. And we heard, and there was significant support for that type of, you know, we want to save as many trees as is possible in the city of Eugene. And I think what staff did here was heard from them, because they're the actual final decision makers on this code. So you have to take the input from them, craft it with the input that we're getting from the professionals that have to work with this code, and boil that down to something that we can digest and say, yes, this is a good compromise. Because when this proposal goes to City Council, guaranteed the main topic that's going to come up is, are we saving trees? And Janessa is going to be able to say, under this code provision, we will save more trees and have more trees in our code language than we would have had beforehand if we had left it the same. And there is an opportunity for developers to work within the code, save as many trees as is possible, and mitigate, because that was something that some of the councilors weren't even in favor of. They don't see the value of some of them. Again, I'm taking away my interpretation of what I heard at council. Some of them don't see the value of mitigation as opposed to preservation. So I think where we're getting to is a good balance, but we also have to consider that we're not the last say on this, and the people that are the last say on it aren't quite as versed as staff or the rest of the commission.
I'm going to jump in just for a second. I have Commissioner Taylor next in line here, but I think to Commissioner Fragala's, I think it was a point, we have drifted off of our sort of ABCD approach to this, but I think in terms of bringing all of us up to speed on trees, that's how I viewed it. We sort of we stopped, we did a little pause, we got a little primer in what we were doing with trees in general, and I hope now we're ready to get back on our list. So having said that, Commissioner Taylor, you're up.
My question, I was going to address Commissioner Edwards. I can pause and wait because it does become applicable when we revisit my proposal that outside of the South Hills area, 100%.
Oh, right, 100% mitigation, right.
Yep.
Right. So Janessa, can you explain getting back on our list or where we are?
Yes, so we are about to move out of trees. So that was the final tree issue. And then we were going to move on to 9.7007, which was related to the neighborhood applicant meetings, and line item 22 out of about 40. So to give you an idea of where we are in my table.
Okay. And then the line item that we're currently on, what is it that we should be doing?
So the one that we're currently on is there was a request to drop the neighborhood applicant meeting. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my Zooms here real quick so I can see everything in my list.
Request asking if you need a straw poll for the tree question. Oh. And I think the answer is no, it's not highlighted yellow. If everyone's okay with the staff response, you could do the thumbs up and we could move on to the next.
Right, keeping in mind that Commissioner Taylor has an issue that we're going to get to once we get through our list, which is tree related. So
I did have a question though.
Yes, yes.
So in the staff response, there was talk about 40% and 50% number. Did you want us to weigh in on that? Because I put down 50% is what I would be in favor of. I didn't know if that was a decision that you were still looking for.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Borowski. That was something that I had mentioned, was that it was more trying to kind of give the comparison that at 50% as we have it now of DBH, and I kind of gave the little thought experiment that in order for 50% DBH to actually take up 50% of a development site, you would need a tree that literally existed on the entire area of the development site. So you're never going to have that. So a 50% total of existing diameter breast height preservation requirement it's going to vary in terms of how much of the development site that translates to in area. And so I was trying to give some context around the 50% number that staff had drafted. And then it's kind of up to the commissioners if somebody wants to open that up. There wasn't a specific requested change for that number from anybody. So I'm comfortable with 50% given all those reasons.
Okay, I think we're moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, so next let's go ahead and move to 9.7007 subsection 1. That's line item 22 and it's on page 26 in the packet. And this was requested change to remove the neighborhood applicant meetings requirement from 3-lot partitions. And I think this was one of the kind of more policy level decisions for you to consider. It would be, in our opinion, it would be consistent with removing barriers to housing. We've said many times throughout this project that partitions are a tool for infill development. There's not a lot of design flexibility in a 3-lot partition. So some of the feedback we heard was that it can be frustrating because neighbors, that do want to show up and kind of contest something don't necessarily have a lot of way to influence the outcome of the development because there's just so many constraints around designing a small partition. But we're kind of neutral. This wasn't identified early on as something to be removed. And I think it's something for you to discuss in terms of responsiveness to the testimony, and whether you would like to make that change.
Commissioner Taylor.
I would like to propose removing the requirement for 3-lot partitions.
Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I also agree. I think that on small partitions like this, basically it's kind of getting neighbors' hopes up that they're going to be able to influence the decisions when in all reality, especially under clear and objective, there's really nothing that they're going to do except for they're going to come there and think that their voice is being heard when it really has little or no effect on if it's hitting the clear and objective. So while I'm all in favor of bringing in neighbors on developments to have it be cohesive for a cohesive neighborhood, in this instance, I see it only as being a divisive thing. So I'm definitely in favor.
Commissioner Fragola.
I'm in support of this.
Okay, so the issue before us is dropping the requirement for 3-lot partitions. Can I see thumbs, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Very good, thank you.
Great. The next item, we're going to move to we're now moving to the adjustment review criteria for tree preservation standards at 9.8030 subsection 13C. And that's on page 28 of your packet. And this was some refinement to the criteria. And this was one where I went ahead and made some draft suggested changes to address the concerns that were brought up in the discussion with, a lot of this came from my phone conversation with Renee Clough and Carol Shermer, where we spent a significant amount of time going through these. And so there was language in particular that read "to the greatest degree practicable" that was concerning, and that was what I alluded to earlier, that when we brought the general track criteria into this and dropped it into the adjustment review criteria, that is problematic in that it's a very high bar, and adjustments are intended to be giving you more added flexibility. So this one we can do, if the commission likes the highlighted suggested edits that staff's proposed, then a straw poll is not necessarily required, because at the end I have a line item where we can straw poll for all of the highlighted changes. Most of the changes are typos or small minor clarifications. This is probably the most significant section where there were pretty direct staff recommended changes.
I think we can move forward to the next item on this one.
Good.
I got a couple head nods, so let's move on.
Okay, great. Then, well, actually, before we move on though, Commissioner Taylor, this is where you had mentioned wanting to talk about the mitigation. And so I was going to point out that this is where we allow mitigation to be up to sorry, I'm rereading. I want to give you the this is where we kind of looked at where they are, and in terms of elevation South Hill study for how much mitigation can occur. And so it does allow for up to 100% of the minimum tree preservation requirement if the following requirements are met. And that's where, for proposed subdivisions, new trees had to be planted so that lots up to 7,000 square feet will contain a minimum of 2 trees, and lots 7,000 square feet or more will contain a minimum of 3 trees. And then for all other developments, the proposed design must either provide 1 tree per dwelling unit. So again, if we're talking R2 property where there's a multifamily, a small multifamily type development, then it would only be 1 tree per dwelling unit. Or there's another ratio. So Commissioner Taylor, does this not get to what you were meaning on the up to 100% reduction? Because to me, I feel like it's the only difference is the outright allowance for 100% mitigation written into the code standards versus sending it to the adjustment review criteria in order to get that full mitigation allowance.
Yeah, I using Commissioner Edwards' example would be mine. So once again, I really am a proponent of the UGB and our city limits. It's pretty profound. We live in the state of Oregon. And the idea of preserving, having development respond and preserving trees within, especially in the flatlands, there's other reasons why in the sloped areas, actually there's environmental, there's some other considerations to include. On the flatland, I mean, when you're talking about outside of those areas, I personally think that I am a proponent of housing over the preservation of trees, is that it's exactly what Commissioner Edwards described. So I am, honestly, if a tree can be preserved, I think it's going to be done. Trees, I know that there's an example of a project that is downtown with housing that there was, because of a discretionary track and the preservation of 1 tree, there was a modification to the design in order to have the tree. And then within 3 years, the tree had to be removed. And the city urban forestry was the one who decided that it needed to be removed. So trees do have lifespans. And I am a huge proponent of an urban forest. So mitigation is not questionable for me. I mean, it's needed. So preservation of trees in the more core of our city that's in the outside of those sloped areas, I do think 100% mitigation should be allowed. I think that's how we're going to get housing. We're going to allow, it is so complicated. Adjustment review costs money. It's discretionary. I mean, it's more than $10,000 to do an adjustment review. That's some cost. That's not insignificant. So allowing a discretionary track, I think it's great. But I just feel strongly about this, just because I think that's why I'd rather see our urban forests beyond our UGB preserved in a way that is as pure as it is, than us concentrating on specific trees that alter our development so that potentially we have to look at expansion of the UGB because we don't have the density that we need within the city of Eugene. So anyways, this is challenging. I mean, it's very complicated, and I think you've done a great job. I just would like to see mitigation being an option, 100% option without a discretionary track.
Commissioner Fragola.
So I feel like I'm hearing people use preservation and mitigation interchangeably. And I'd just like to clarify, because I feel like from previous conversations, when we said preservation, it meant leaving the tree that's there. When we said mitigation, it meant replacing the tree. So am I correct in that understanding? Okay, great. I feel like I'm hearing people use preservation interchangeably. And then I'd also like clarification on the area that we're talking about that would be outside the South Hills study, Commissioner Taylor.
Let's put it to staff, because essentially that could mean, that could have meant it's subdivision Tiffany's, Commissioner Edwards' example is exactly what I'm talking about.
Right, so my understanding is that the South Hills study applies to anything south of 18th, correct? And is there also an eastern limit to it?
So it's basically if you take 18th Avenue across everything south of 18th Avenue that is 500 feet or higher elevation, that's considered the boundaries of the South Hills study. We define the South Hills area in the tree preservation standards right up at the beginning of sub 2 to give added clarity to that geographic boundary. And so to Commissioner Taylor, if I'm understanding, what she's proposing is that if you go back to that very first table in 9.6885, that's got the simple 3 different areas of town where you've got the minimum preservation percentage and then the maximum mitigation, that table, the very first line item is outside of the South Hills area. So that's kind of everything north of 18th and under 500, or well, everything north of 18th. So in that area, if I understand it right, Commissioner Taylor is proposing that we adjust that 50% mitigation to 100% by right through code without bumping that region into an adjustment review in order to fully mitigate the trees.
So, okay, great. I just wanted a reminder. I remember the 18th Avenue. I just wasn't clear on if there was also a boundary on the eastern edge of that area, but it sounds like it's related to elevation. So I just want to say that in terms of the conversation around preserving or mitigating trees, I'm most interested in making sure that we have trees, that we have an urban forest, because that is significant when we think about climate change. And but I would also say that I support what Commissioner Taylor is saying, that in that region of the city that she's talking about, I would not want a tree to be a barrier to housing if they were going to mitigate the tree, right? So I would need to understand, like, what are the levels of mitigation that we're talking about if we replace that percentage.
So the true kind of difference in that change, as with a 40% mitigate or preservation requirement, that's your starting point, then 50% of that can be mitigated. So that leaves you with an effective 20% preservation, where those are trees that would need to be kept on, existing trees left in place and protected. With the mitigation, that's the 20% that you're losing in preservation, but you're still accounting for replanting to mitigate that loss. So it's really the distinguishing, you know, factor for this decision is, is it more important to you to ensure that 20% of the DBH on the development site is truly preserved, or are you okay with all of the trees being replanted or being mitigated?
So if the
area,
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to walk myself through this. If we allowed 100% mitigation, would they have to mitigate 50%, 60%, 100% of the trees? I mean,
40%.
40%. Great.
It would be that
you.
original 40%. So that's a good clarification. So the 40% assumes that 60% of the existing trees are by right can be removed. And
okay, great. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. Yes. So I do support Commissioner Taylor's idea.
Commissioner Beeson, you're up.
So I wanted to say I also support what Commissioner Taylor's proposing. And I've kind of come to that over the last year as I've been through some of these discussions. I think the idea inside the UGB, I guess the way that I would talk about it, inside the UGB, to the extent we can be removing barriers to housing, we can be promoting more density, more economy, and more housing, I think is important. And as I understand this, or as I'm trying to understand it, I think when we go through and have the mitigation, the developers are going to be required to, I guess, maintain some level of the trees and or replant trees. And I think that's important. I guess just as a side comment, I also agree, with the state land use goals, of course, the idea of the UGB and the idea of preserving the trees outside the UGB. In kind of as a comment, what I've seen in a lot of years here, I'm not sure collectively here that we do all that good a job preserving the trees outside the UGB. I don't see that too much around the area I live when I wander around. So that's not in our purview. I understand that, but I think anyway, I agree with, I think where Commissioner Taylor's going with this. Thanks.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I think that I can agree with Commissioner Taylor, but I also think that if we do go this direction, we need to be clear and articulate when we present it to the city council, and put it in the same terms that Commissioner Taylor put it in there, that we are doing what we're doing in regards to tree mitigation as opposed to preservation, because it is a way to get us more housing built and reduce the barriers to getting housing built while preserving an urban forest within our UGB. It needs to be articulated clearly, because the council will hear you're cutting existing trees and putting up a skinnier tree. And that may be true for the first couple of years, but as we all know, like Commissioner Taylor said, trees grow, trees die, and trees get replanted. So while I'm 100% in favor of that, we need to parse this very succinctly, I think, going forward. And I also believe that it's something that would behoove us to have, if we're going to go this direction, it be a unanimous vote. That would help to land it at the next level.
So I have to say, I think I was 100% advocate from the beginning. And frankly, I can't remember why we ended up at 50. It must have been some kind of compromise along the way. So I get it. I think Commissioner Borowski's points are very well taken. The reality is we're talking about a preservation of 40% of the trees on the site. That's not an insignificant number by any means. So I think we're good to go. I've got Lauren Summers in the line, and then Commissioner Isaacson.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. I just have a clarification question. So currently, the way that the code is drafted, the by right mitigation in the tree standards doesn't have any requirements really about where the trees need to be planted. It's just a number of trees. And to get to 100% mitigation, you would go through adjustment review, and the adjustment review does have some additional requirements about where the trees need to be planted, how many on which lot, et cetera, et cetera. If you, it sounds like Planning Commission is going to give the thumbs up to going to 100% mitigation, at least for properties outside of that South Hills area, by right, without going through an adjustment review. So my question is, do you want to bring those kind of where the trees need to be planted standards from the adjustment review into the main standards? Or do you want to keep the main standards as they are and not really regulate where those mitigation trees need to be replanted?
That's certainly a good question. Let's turn to Commissioner Isaacson.
I guess this is another recycling of the question I asked from before. Get some institutional memory in here. It seems like the questions that come up to the City Council, Commissioner Borowski, that to your point, that there's the potential for us to lop down old growth or older trees and replace them with new little sprouts and call that an equal apples to apples solution, for which their response predictably would be that's not acceptable. So can we institute or ask staff to come up with some language that says there's going to be a bare minimum that has to be preserved, or if they're going to exceed below that bare minimum, that there be some sort of process by which a more intense review is made, so that is more palatable to members on the City Council. I hope I'm communicating that correctly.
I feel like we're almost going full circle because to do that within the by right, the clear and objective standards is going to increase complexity, which we already revised to reduce complexity and kind of bring it down. That is why we put the mitigation into the adjustment review, where we could do more scrutiny and kind of flesh it out a little bit more in terms of what we're getting and what that is. Of course we can absolutely revise that section. That will take more time, need to come back again to you, because I think to do something like that, I think we're talking about a significant change that would need to definitely be vetted back through you again. I'm glad, Lauren, that you brought that up, because that was going through my mind, that all of these, that we kind of relied on the language that's in the adjustment review for those bigger mitigation areas in terms of what the bare minimum is, setting that bare minimum. If you're going to mitigate everything, then there needs to be at least, this. I think that we would need to consider incorporating that into the subsection 2 requirements, or continue to rely on the adjustment review for that extra 20% of mitigation and let this live in the adjustment criteria. I don't have a strong feeling on either direction on that. To me, it's the adjustment is doing exactly what it was intended. It's allowing the greater flexibility while still maintaining kind of a minimum preservation within the by right code.
Not to overly complicate the heck out of this even further, and I apologize if I am, I would assume that it's not a one-size-fits-all for all parts of the city, that there are going to be areas that this is a greater concern than others. So can the language be specific to those particular areas, in particular zones where the concern is greater, and not in the areas where there is less concern, or it's really going to be less of an issue, so that we're not bogging down the entire system by, relatively complex regulatory stuff that will bring down development, bring down housing building. At the same time, we're trying to increase building and housing, but also understand the needs of the community.
Yeah, and I think that's why that table does treat 3 different regions of Eugene differently. The north part of town that doesn't really have as much urban forest to begin with. It's that's where we allowed more mitigation and kind of more by right development options without as heavy a preservation requirement. And then it gradually, as you get closer to the ridgeline and the higher elevations and the South Hill study that, gives us policy direction, that's where those requirements get more stringent. So that gradation is kind of already built in.
All right, thank you.
Got to Commissioner Taylor next.
So once again, I want to reiterate, I definitely am a proponent of 100% mitigation. Going to what Commissioner Isaacson said, honestly, what we're talking about, you're seeing a portion of the code, right? Because there's going to be clear and objective standards. There are a lot of standards we haven't touched. So every development is balancing a bunch of criteria. So preservation of a large tree, if there could be 2 significant trees on a site with a certain DBH, they could be a really, really not in great location. So if we say that a certain percentage has to be preserved, and then you've got your mitigation, if it's not 100%, one of those trees might have to stay. It means that potentially an entire building, and I'm not exaggerating, could potentially not go on a site. And obviously what would happen is it would force that owner to go through a discretionary process. And so anyways, there are implications to each of our decisions. And that's where I'm saying I like the gradation in terms of where there's more sensitive areas, maintaining trees. Personally, I think mitigation is a really viable option. We are going to maintain, and actually, as Janessa said, we're actually going to grow our urban forest with the current code that we're looking at right now with these land use applications. So I also would like to see, thank you, Lauren, for bringing in some of the pieces in Section D that's a part of the adjustment review, and bring that in if Planning Commission is supportive of the 100% mitigation. If we decide, I am a proponent of bringing in some of that direction. And because we're gonna have another meeting, maybe we just relook at the language. I don't know.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm speaking to what Lauren just brought up, and that is Section D, which is on page 25 of the AIS. So basically that says if there's development, you have to have 1 tree per, for all other developments, and this is below 900 feet, so not in South Hill study. Provide 1 tree per dwelling unit, or, and this is where I have the question, B, provide 1 replacement tree per 8 inches of DBH. And then it goes on to, for an example, where if you had 80 inches of DBH, then you would have to put 10 trees. That's an either or an or. So if it's 1 house that has 80 inches of DBH, they can replace that with 1 tree, or is it that or? Because that gets to kind of what Commissioner Isaacson was saying. If we're cutting down 80-year-old fir tree that has a 30-inch DBH, and we're replacing that with 1 tree because it's an or, that's going to be a tough sell to tree advocates, because they're going to say, you pick a tree from that category up above, and it may be a 2-inch DBH, and you're replacing a 30-inch DBH with it. So I'm just curious. I think we do need to move some section of Section D up, but I think it needs to be looked at, not to the extent that we were at before. And this goes to you, Daniel. Before, we had this super complex matrix of, if you're removing this many DBHs, you've got to replace it with this much DBH, and to try to get to that compromise of taking a big tree down and replacing it with a small one. So I think that, for me, I would be comfortable if we're removing and allowing 100% mitigation, that we put some sort of Section D with that up above and remove the adjustment review altogether. And then the other question that I would have is, this is saying, except for above 900 feet, would it be appropriate to say any, and it may be someplace else in the code, but keep the except for 900 feet, because that's another category with South Hill Study, but will the 500 feet of South Hill Study be captured if we move it up above, or would that fall away as well?
So the 500 feet and below is not in the South Hills Study area by definition. So if the recommendation is to change to allow 100% mitigation to that area, then that area would no longer go to an adjustment review. This criteria could still stand as written, and basically the except areas over 900 feet, that portion would apply to the part between 900 and 500 in the South Hills area. So there's still an applicability where you're still taking an area that is more tree preservation sensitive because of the policy direction from South Hills Study, putting it through an adjustment in order to get more than the by right allowance for mitigation, and invoking these standards. The other thing that I wanted to point out, Commissioner Borofsky, if I heard you correctly, I think there's a clarification or a correction in there that I can make. It is an or, provide 1 tree per dwelling unit or 1 replacement tree per 8 inches of diameter breast height. So the 80-inch tree would require 10 replacement trees, or 80 inches worth of diameter breast height. Trunk area would translate to 10 replacement trees. This is in the context of a development. So your single family lot is not going to go through this. It's not going to go through the adjustment review criteria on its own, because these standards aren't going to be applicable to the lot once it's created. Then we would be leaning on what the development, the subdivision tree removal plan, or the PUD plan required. That's kind of the time that we would be applying these. So it'd be up to kind of the developer to say, they could decide if providing 1 tree per dwelling unit is less tree or fewer trees than going by the 8 inches diameter breast height formula. They could pick 1 tree per dwelling unit and then just say every lot's going to put a tree out there. They're going to be required to plant a mitigation tree, which was what the recommendation was. That was one of the recommendations from a stakeholder, to do the 1 tree per dwelling unit, or find another way to require the mitigation. Oh, you're muted still.
Okay, I've got
a quick follow up on that. I'm sorry, but if they were to go Section B of that, would that then encompass doing a full survey of all DBH trees that were going to be mitigated, and gets us back to we've got to count every tree and measure it and then figure out what our mitigation plan is?
Because that review would be part of a discretionary adjustment review process anyway. They would need to demonstrate as evidence in the Type 2 adjustment process that they are meeting the one of those 2 options. So
I'm saying, if we move this section up above, out of the review, and move it up to above, then would it require them to count every tree on their development site?
We would need to relook. That's part of this is a bigger change than I anticipated tonight. So I think we're going to have to kind of work on this before we come back, come up with some proposal. But if we're moving this language over, we'll have to do that kind of clear and objective analysis on it, because it was written for an adjustment review criterion, not for a clear and objective criterion. So we're kind of needing to look at it differently now.
Okay, so I've got Commissioner Taylor here in the queue.
So I just want to make just a note, and thank you, Janessa, for actually pointing that out, which is what I was going to point out. I do have concerns with moving the language under subsection D that was essentially discretionary, moving it up into it. That's why I said something like. I also wanted to, even if it was in the adjustment review, before you move forward, if Planning Commission is supportive of the 100% mitigation for areas outside the sub areas, the South Eugene study area, 900, 500, and 900. Sorry, I'm not on that page. But has anybody done the math for some of these developments? Because if you provided 1 tree per dwelling unit, I mean, this could be something actually unachievable. When you've got your street standard, you've got your parking lot standards, you've got your open space standards for multifamily standards. I mean, granted, I know that the more dense aren't required to actually apply for that, but R2 is. So I'm like, I actually have questioned that it's even achievable, these two, A and B. In reality. So I'm just curious if, and I could be totally wrong, I'm just thinking back at some projects I'm more familiar with, and wow, this could be, because R2 you can build up to 35 feet. You've got to look at your density and some of the size sites that could be there. You have studio apartments. If it's 1 dwelling unit, you could have a situation where you can't meet other. Anyways, so I just wanted to find out what kind of exploration was done for A and B before you start to look at those standards, whether they're here or above. I'm not sure. I just would love an explanation, because I'm not sure this is going to work.
I think that's why there's an or there, is that one
B is challenged
because B may be fewer trees than A. I think that there's going to be different scenarios where, like you said, a higher density R2 development multifamily may require more based on the per dwelling unit formula than it would if there's not a lot of trees on the site or something, and we're calculating based on the DBH, that may result in fewer mitigation trees. So capacity-wise, no, I have not gone through and done an analysis and tried to look at existing developments. The one tree per dwelling unit came directly from a stakeholder recommendation as something that's done in other communities and that they felt was reasonable. And so we kind of grabbed onto that and then wanted to address some added flexibility in terms of, giving a couple different ways to get to that number, and recognizing that one of those 2 options is going to be more workable.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to do a little time check here? We we're scheduled to meet till 8:30 with the idea that we could add an extra half an hour if we felt like we were close to the finish line. The finish line is such that I can see it from here, but I don't think we're really that close. And I'm not sure whether the commission wants to keep working for another half hour and try to chip away at some of these, or whether we want to give direction to staff on the current issue we're on and then call it a day. So what do people think about, well, how about thumbs up for finishing what we're doing and then adjourning, knowing that we have another 5 or 6 of these plus the one we identified before. Is that going to be okay? I've got a couple thumbs up. The alternative is to just keep going until 9. Sorry.
And
okay,
just
so
a little
certain consensus on that. So that being the consensus, then I think where we are on this issue is to take it back to run it back to staff, have you all look at 100% mitigation for the areas that are not in the South Hill study, and come back to us with language, or at least look at including that item D that was part of the adjustment review to see if that's appropriate to add location requirements to such a thing. That's where we think we are. I need thumbs up on that or clarification if that wasn't clear. Can't imagine it wasn't. So thumbs up on that. Okay, that looks like everybody, we're consensus, 100% unanimity on that one. And with that, Alyssa or Janessa, anything else go to the order here before we depart for the evening?
The only thing I want to mention is that you have a busy week next week. On Monday, you have middle housing work session. Be filling the full 2 hours with that topic. Tuesday night, you have an appeal hearing. And then Thursday, Thursday is an off time. So I'm not going to say what it is because I can't remember. Let me see. Thursday at noon, the 17th at noon, you begin deliberations on the appeal. And we're going to have to look to see when we can come back with clear and objective. Right now, your December schedule is full. It depends on how, I guess partly depends on how long deliberations take you for the appeal. We're hopeful not to hold the meeting on the 28th because we have a lot of staff gone. So it's possible that clear and objective won't be able to come back until January unless you want to try to fit another meeting in. But you're pretty busy between now and then. So I think we're going to have to look for January for that.
Do we have a meeting on the 21st?
The 21st is being held for continuation of deliberations for the appeal. That is a potential. So we will work towards that, assuming Janessa can get the information she needs from the folks she'll be collaborating with on that. So we're going to keep that open as an option.
Okay, I've got Commissioner Isaacson with your hand up.
I just want to thank staff for compiling this. It's been really informative, and I wanted to thank Commissioner Taylor and Borowski for allowing the education to come my way. I know that this is going to be a long onboarding process, and it's nice to field questions to the more experienced members who not just deal with this from the commission side, but also in their professional life. We've got some insight because that's very helpful to reach a decision. So thank you.
And Commissioner Taylor.
I wanted to find out when it comes, after we make our recommendations to council, how long does staff, do you think it's going to take before, when it goes to city council and then for adoption? What is your anticipated schedule for that? That's one question. The other, I want to congratulate Alyssa.
Thank you. And I'd say we usually give ourselves about a month because the ordinance needs to be, sometimes longer, the ordinance needs to be written and reviewed. There's some charter noticing requirements, there's some public hearing requirements, and then council typically only holds public hearings on the third Monday of the month, so it depends when it falls. So 30 at a minimum.
Okay, Commissioner Fragola.
I was also wondering are we going to have the ADU stuff come back to us? Like what's going to happen with that?
That is a super good question. Right now, we're still in the middle of the appeal period. So we need to see where it lands on that. And then we'll come back to you with what the plan is. Right now, I haven't spoken with the attorneys on what our options are, if it just goes back to council or if it needs to go back to the planning commission. So we will come back and I will make sure I let you know where that stands.
Great, thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, I see no more hands and therefore no more reason to keep us all here. Thank you all for your time. Busy week. So see you soon. Bye.
If anybody can hang out after